the proboarders guys. We're going to pick apart Eldritch Wizardry and fess up to who did what. But before I begin, I have to explain the vibe, the atmosphere when we were doing this. We were in the gray building, with the hobby shop downstairs and the offices upstairs at the time. And Brian's office, Gary's office, my office, and Mike Carr's office were all opened off a hall that couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 feet long. So we could literally call out to each other, and often did. Hey, I need a word for, I need that, you know. And so a lot of what we did back then was very communally done. Who did exactly what? Only in a few instances can I tell you that, because we all buffed each other's stuff. We polished each other's stuff. We inserted words. We made suggestions for changes. And that's where all of this stuff came from. For instance, the apparatus of Qualish, the mechanical crawdad. That's something that Brian thought up and then used the name of my bad guy from my campaign down in Carbondale to attribute it. So Brian's idea, my guy's name, I looked it over, you know, buffed it a little. Maybe I didn't. It's really hard to tell you exactly. My job as editor at that time was to make stuff read well. I've always believed as an editor that there's a certain euphony of the lilt of language. And when you don't get it right, you get a clunk and it stops and you have to read that paragraph again and figure out what it was supposed to be. So my job was to sometimes take a handful of charts that were about something or other and then write all the copy that explained these charts and what they were used for. Or maybe I had the copy and I had to make the charts, interpreting the copy. And the copy could be from somebody other than Gary. It could have been from Dave back with Blackmore. It could have been from Brian. It could have been from any number of people. Steve Marsh. It could have been from Dennis Sestari, Dr. Sestari. So nobody really can say, with just a few exceptions, that they are responsible for that thing. Now, I'm going to have to refer to this list because you guys had a heck of a list. And the way my fingers are right now, I couldn't possibly type out all the answers to this in 4 nights because I just am not able to type that much right now as the after effects of the platinum wear off. So you said that basically the supplement is divided into 4 main things: psionics, along with psionic monsters, the druid class, demons, artifacts, and relics. And yeah, that's kind of what we did. Everything in there had a purpose at the time. Again, as I've said in earlier broadcasts of the Convention in the Dungeon, that we did things, we introduced things, we introduced new rules to guide and direct the game's development in ways that we figured would be saleable as well as not objectionable. Demons, we kind of stepped out there and started some of the worst crap we ever heard. So I'll start in order that you have them. Who's primarily responsible? Psionics, that was me. Gary said we ought to do some psionics if we're gonna, you know, I told him that if we were gonna have these new monsters, then we needed, if you know, we had the mind flare and we had the brain mole, I believe, and that alone was enough for me to think that, well, there ought to be a chance that every once in a while somebody can fight back with these things on their own turf. And again, remember, Gary and I were big fans of Dr. Strange, so we were all about mental waves and, you know, stuff like that. So I developed the psionics. I showed them to Gary. He helped me a little bit on the buffing, asked a couple of pertinent questions that I hadn't explained real well. And the psionics came out, and they were complicated, and they were only supposed to be for like the 1 in 1,000 PCs would have a chance to have perhaps probably only a mild psionic ability, the way we slanted the tables in that. Of course, players took it and ran. DMs weren't stringent enough in saying no. So pretty soon everybody had psionic skills and abilities, which made it ludicrous in the extreme. But no, psionics is mine, for better or for worse. Don't blame Brian. Don't blame Steve. For better or for worse. Now, it could be that Brian had some suggestions, and it could be that Steve had some ideas or a chart or a table. 40 years, I can't tell you for exactly sure. But I'm pretty sure that I'm to blame for the psionics that came out, pretty much. Druid characters. Dennis Astari, Dr. Dennis, known as Bunny Burrows on Facebook. Also really neat, really nice guy to know. His was the first time that somebody gave us a class so well developed that we published it, period. I might have corrected a misspelling or two, and that might be unfair to the good doctor, because his manuscripts, as I recall, were usually pretty dang good. He was one of the best writers that we had writing back then, because he had some skills at it before he started writing for games. So the Druid class, in my opinion, was a wonderful NPC class, a wonderful recurring character, a wonderful resource. But I don't have Druids as classes in my campaigns or games. I don't have a Druid, not a true Druid, in any of my pre-gens, because Druidry, and I've studied quite a lot and read quite a lot on Druidry, regardless of what Caesar and the Roman historians said. Being a good Druid would be really hard if you were clumping around with a bunch of adventurers all the time, killing stuff and looting stuff and whatever. But they would make great NPCs because they can help you transit the forest, or help you in other ways to cross a great deal of outdoor distance, perhaps, and not be detected. A lot of stuff that I thought made great NPCs ended up people trying to make them into PCs, and I didn't always agree with that. I think the 4 basic classes are fine, and some of the distinctions, like, I won't have monks in my campaign or my games or in my pre-gens. I sometimes throw a paladin in, just because it screws up the group. If the paladin is picked by a person who likes being a paladin, they generally play like they have a stick up their butt and give everybody else grief. And I, as the DM, find that quite amusing and entertaining. And so I don't encourage it, but I make it possible. Demons, yeah, Gary was demons, but we all buffed the demons. By all, I mean Brian, and to a smaller extent, Gary and I spent some hours working on the demons after he came up with his hierarchy. Then we started balancing. Hit points and skills and powers and abilities. And let's face it, even a minor demons is nothing you ever want to run into. And we put it in demons because we thought we'd put it in a monastery that was so bad, so badass, that we'd put a screeching halt to this crazy level creep. I mean, yeah, okay, you need something because in the story I told before about the group that wiped out Valhalla one weekend. Well, okay, why don't you go to the 3rd layer of hell and fight 27 demons? I don't care if they're 2nd and 3rd lowest levels. Go fight them in their turf, and all of a sudden those guys aren't going to be so bad. So demons were put in to raise the stakes a lot. And also because if in Appendix N there are a lot of demons in those various books, and we thought it was time to introduce those into the D&D game world. The monsters kept getting nastier and badder, and more hit points and more damage that they dealt out. for the reason that we felt we were giving the DM something to rein in a party that was running amok. Let them take on that demon and find out they all have 60 hit points or more and lob spells like it's nobody's business. Party gets a lesson. Artifacts and relics. Okay. To be honest, I don't know how much Jim Ward had to do with the artifacts and relics, other than playing in the games in which they were invented, and, as often happened at Gary's table, probably making suggestions at some point along the way. But I'm not sure, and I talked to Jim, and he's not sure either. But the artifacts, the way you have them accredited here, Invulnerable Cloud of Arn, that's right. That was Gary's homage to Dave Arneson, who had one of the first enchanted suits of armor. That was, in those days, at that time, made him nearly invulnerable to, missiles or anything like that. Now, he'd have been roasted and fricasseed inside of it by a dragon, but okay. And so that was an obvious homage for Dave. The Mace of Cuthbert, yeah, that was Brian's. Sword of Cass. I'm not sure about that. It could have been Brian. It could have been Gary. It could have been the two of them. I didn't know. They didn't show me that, oddly enough, because I don't know how happy I'd have been with it going out with Cass on it, an obvious Easter egg. But it was the two of them. To what degree, I couldn't tell you. Gary would often talk to Brian and say, okay, yeah, I put this thing into the campaign, and it had such and such effect. Why don't you write me up a paragraph on it, and we'll take it from there. Like, I know that's where the Vecna stuff came from. Vecna is Gary's stuff. I talked to Ernie about this, in fact, today. And he remembers his dad talking to Brian about this stuff of Vecna and how it was an anagram for Jack Vance, who was, one of Gary's hero authors, to the extent that his magic system was the D&D concept. And it's highly likely that the two of them had varying degrees of input on the Hand of Vecna, the Iron Vecna, the Iron Flask of Tyranny the Merciless. That was definitely out of Gary's early campaign. Cleanolys's Marvelous Nightingale, that was definitely Gary. And like everything else, I buffed words here and there. I did what editors do on all this stuff. So, and some I have a great deal of input. Some I have very little input. Again, we were in such close quarters, and we shared ideas all the time. And Gary being there pounding away at his typewriter, and he'd holler out, hey, Tim, I need a word for, whatever. Which wasn't very often, because Gary had a marvelous vocabulary, but it happened. And as often as not, I was able to give him one he liked. I have friends now that do that. They call me in the middle of the day and go, hey, I need a word for, and it fits in between this one and that one. And so I'm good at words, I guess. The Queen Alyssa's Nightingale was also a mechanical bird that his mother or his grandmother had, an old Swiss clockwork bird. Mighty Servant of Luco, that was absolute Gary. When Luke was like, good Lord, 5 or 6, he was actively playing in the campaign, and he was little, and he was feisty, and he had all the energy and the hyperactivity of a kid that age. And to even things up, Gary let him find this great big robotic golem-like mighty servant of Luco, and he did whatever Luke told him to do. And so now Luke was absolutely just as bad as anybody at the table, because this guy would just smash you. And so that was Ernie's or Luke's. That was Luke's equalizer, because he was a little kid, but he was an avid player. I can remember him running around the table trying to set up the dungeon game because he wanted somebody to play with him. So he was little, but look at the line he came from. He was Mystical Organ. That was Gary Loosely adapted from a couple of like Vincent Price and Boris Karloff old scary spooky movies, which Gary liked a lot. Um, I never did like them a lot, so I couldn't tell you which one, but there's two or three where they're organ players and it gets real dramatic and it's really, wild and crazy. The Ring of Gags, yeah, that was Gary's ring that he invented. Um, and the crowns, orbs, and scepters. Those were probably some of the most collaborative amongst Gary and I particularly, and Brian also. And don't forget that, my car doesn't get looked at as he should as a fantasist. He's a dead bang simulation game designer, but he's also a good fantasist. He played in all those early games. And so very often somebody call out for a word and Mike could pop up with the perfect word. And it was all like, wow. And we had to keep reminding ourselves that Mike did more than fly biplanes. That was just the first few weeks he was there. Of course, we came to realize that just what a sharp guy he was and what a great sense of humor he had. But anyway, that's off the subject. That really takes care of your list. What I'm going to do now is figure out how I send out invites so that only the people from your pro board can see this. And I'll have to send an invite to each of you. So tell the other people on the board that they've got to send me their email address so that I can do that. Let's see, what else was there about Eldritch Wizardry? Of course, everybody knows that's the one that nearly killed the brand because of the cover on the front. The irony of the cover on the front, I found out many years later, not that long ago, but many years after the publishing, was drawn by a 15-year-old girl. It was her first commercial sale. And somehow or other, she got the bank to photostat the check. And all those years later, she still had that in a little frame in her office somewhere as her first sale, which was neat for me because there's some Hanyak right now troll on Facebook ragging on the Monster Manual's first cover. And I kind of overreacted a little bit and called him out for lack of credentials or lack of expertise or lack of anything to feel fit to criticize something that we did 40 years ago. We had art. We printed the art that we liked. To be bluntly honest, Dave Sutherland got that cover. He was told, okay, we're going to do the Monster Manual. And you got the cover, or whichever one it is he has. The one with the bugbear below, or whatever that is below, and the dragon flying up above. And at the time, we thought it was great. It showed the aspects of above and below ground play, etc. And Dave was never the greatest artist in the field, but there wasn't a field. There's a documentary being made called The Eye of the Beholder. It's being made by an art guy about the art that became iconic D&D fantasy art. And he was shocked to learn that I was the gatekeeper of art for the most part at TSR, particularly the early years, and that I used what I liked. And that was my criteria. If I liked it, I used it. Sometimes they didn't work. I liked them. I did a couple of covers that fell flat on their face, but I'm not ashamed that I did them. I did a couple of abstract covers that the readers, pardon me, the readers of the magazine were not quite ready for. But that said, I also sold or bought a lot of firsts for a lot of people that have gone on to art history, art fame, if you will. So I'm very pleased to have discovered, if you want to call it that, a whole lot of people that either got hired by TSR or went on to do book covers for big name publishers, or went into game design and in the video fields, and just lots of people that we had. And so the art in there is the best stuff I had on hand, and there may have been one or two bespoke pieces. Everything else was always used because there were so many people that wanted to draw fantasy, and we were the only people paying money for it. So we got unsolicited art all the time. I had piles of it this deep on my corner of my desk, the slush pile for the art. And that's where we got our art from. And so that's where the art came from there. I did the cover. I selected the cover, designed it, laid it out, whatever. Wasn't very difficult. I'm not claiming it's a great design or anything, but that's the way we did it. We collaborated, especially on that one, and there was a lot of collaboration on the Gods, Demigods, and Hero that followed, where we all had our opinions on how tough this god is compared to that god in another pantheon, and we figured out, try to how to rank them and all that kind of stuff. But that's another supplement that you didn't ask about. So I hope that answers your questions, and if not, I reckon I'll hear from you. You can always leave a comment underneath this after you watch it. Good day.